Hook, she didn't leave because he stopped loving her. She left because she stopped believing in the man she thought he could become. For years, Daniel and Emily fought every battle side by side. They survived unpaid bills, empty refrigerators, broken dreams, and countless disappointments. She believed in him when no one else did. He believed that one day life would finally give them a chance. Then everything changed. Emily's career began to rise. Daniel's never did. At first, it was only late meetings, longer work days, new friends, new ambitions. Then someone else began seeing the potential in Emily. She crossed a line she never thought she would. Daniel forgave her, completely. But forgiveness couldn't heal a heart that had slowly been replaced by disappointment. Years later, she walked away with another man. Daniel lost his marriage, his family, his purpose, and almost his life. But sometimes, God doesn't restore the life you lost. He builds the life you were always meant to have. This is a story about betrayal, not just of a marriage, but of faith, hope, and the promises we make when love is all we have. When love was enough, long before promotions, long before expensive cars, long before success became the measure of a person's worth, there were only Daniel and Emily. They met in a small neighborhood church when they were both in their early 20s. Neither of them had money. Neither came from a wealthy family, but they shared something far more valuable than comfort. They believed that if two people truly loved each other and placed God at the center of their lives, they could overcome anything. Their first conversation happened after a Sunday evening service. Daniel accidentally spilled coffee all over his own shirt while trying to help an elderly man carry a heavy box of donated food. Emily laughed, not because he embarrassed himself, but because he laughed first. That simple moment became the beginning of everything. A few months later, they were inseparable. They dreamed about owning a small home, having 2 children, growing old together. Money was never part of the dream. Peace was. After they got married, reality arrived much faster than they expected. Their apartment was tiny. The refrigerator was rarely full. Their living room furniture had been donated by members of the church. Some nights they shared a single pizza because that was all they could afford. Other nights, dinner was instant noodles and prayer. Oddly enough, those became some of their happiest memories. Daniel worked wherever he could: construction sites, warehouses, moving companies, painting houses, landscaping. If someone offered honest work, he accepted it. The problem wasn't his willingness, it was that nothing ever lasted. Every temporary job eventually ended, every interview ended with the same polite smile. "We'll call you." They never did. Each rejection hurt, but every evening, Emily would sit beside him on their old secondhand couch, take his rough hands into hers, and whisper the same words. "Your value isn't measured by a paycheck." I married the man, not the job. Daniel believed her, not because life gave him reasons to, because she did. Emily had recently started working as an administrative assistant at a small accounting firm. The salary wasn't impressive, but her work ethic was. She arrived early, left late, never complained, never asked for recognition. Within 2 years, her supervisors noticed. She received her first promotion. Daniel surprised her with a homemade dinner and a small bouquet of supermarket flowers. "I'm sorry they're not perfect," he said. Emily smiled as tears filled her eyes. "They're perfect because they're from you." That night, while eating dinner in their tiny apartment, she looked across the table and said something Daniel would never forget. "One day we'll tell our grandchildren about these years, and they'll never believe how happy we were with so little." Daniel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I wouldn't change any of it." Neither of them knew those words would one day become both their greatest comfort and their deepest regret: the distance. That nobody noticed. No marriage falls apart overnight. It happens quietly. So quietly that, most of the time, neither person realizes it's happening. At first, life simply became busier. Daniel accepted every temporary job he could find. Some weeks he worked construction, other weeks he drove delivery trucks. Whenever one opportunity ended, He immediately searched for another. He never stopped trying. Emily saw how hard he worked. She admired his determination, but admiration didn't pay the bills. As the years passed, Emily continued growing inside the company. Her first promotion became a second, then a third. The small accounting firm eventually expanded into one of the fastest growing financial consulting companies in the state. With every promotion came new responsibilities, longer meetings, business dinners, weekend conferences. 4. The first time in her life, people were noticing her talent. Daniel celebrated every achievement as if it were his own. When Emily became operations manager, he spent nearly 3 hours baking a chocolate cake from scratch. It wasn't beautiful. The frosting leaned to one side. The words, "Congratulations," were slightly crooked. Emily laughed the moment she saw it. "You made this?" Daniel scratched the back of his head. "I watched 3 videos before I figured out how to frost a cake." She laughed even harder before wrapping her arms around him. "It's the most beautiful cake I've ever seen," and in that moment, she meant it. But life has a strange way of changing people without asking permission. The more Emily succeeded, the more Daniel questioned himself. He never blamed her, never envied her. If anything, he became her biggest supporter. Yet every promotion reminded him of another interview that had ended with disappointment, another opportunity that had slipped away, another promise that never became reality. Late one evening, Daniel arrived home carrying a small bouquet of white daisies. He remembered Emily mentioning weeks earlier that fresh flowers made the house feel alive. He placed them in a glass vase before she came home. When Emily finally walked through the front door nearly 2 hours later, she smiled. "They're beautiful. I remembered what you said." She kissed his cheek. Then her phone vibrated. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I just need to answer this email really quickly." Daniel nodded. "Of course." 5 minutes became 15. 15 became 40. By the time Emily finally closed her laptop, Daniel had already fallen asleep on the couch. The flowers were still on the table. So was the dinner he had prepared. The next morning, neither of them mentioned it. At work, Emily entered a world Daniel had never experienced. Executives, investors, luxury, hotels, business strategy meetings, people who spoke confidently about million-dollar projects as casually as discussing the weather. For the first time, Emily wasn't simply surviving. She was becoming someone important. One afternoon, during a leadership meeting, a senior executive named Ryan Collins listened carefully as Emily presented an idea for improving the company's operations. When she finished, the room became silent. Ryan leaned forward. "That's probably the smartest proposal I've heard this quarter." The other executives nodded. Emily felt something she hadn't expected. Seen, not as someone's wife, not as someone's employee, but as a leader. That evening, Ryan sent her a short email. "Excellent work today. Your leadership is becoming impossible to ignore." Emily smiled. It was only professional, nothing more. She thanked him politely, then closed her laptop. At home, Daniel was waiting with dinner already on the table. He smiled the moment she walked inside. "I kept it warm," Emily smiled back. "I'm sorry I'm late again." He looked at her for a moment, then quietly served her plate. Neither of them realized it, but while Daniel was still fighting for their future, Emily had already begun discovering a version of herself that no longer depended on him. And sometimes distance doesn't begin with betrayal. It begins when 2 people slowly stop sharing the same world. Cracks beneath the surface from the outside. Daniel and Emily looked like one of those couples everyone admired. They still attended church every Sunday. They still held hands when they walked through the parking lot after the service. They still smiled for family photos. If anyone asked how life was going, they always gave the same answer: "We're doing great." And in many ways, they believed it. But happiness and peace are not always the same thing. Little by little, life began asking more from both of them. Emily's responsibilities at work continued to grow. She was no longer just completing tasks. She was leading projects, managing people, making decisions that affected entire departments. The company trusted her judgment. Her supervisors admired her work ethic. Every new promotion came with a larger office, a better salary, and longer hours. Daniel couldn't have been prouder. Every promotion felt like proof that all their sacrifices had been worth something. He celebrated every achievement as though it belonged to both of them. When Emily became operations manager, Daniel spent nearly 3 hours baking her a chocolate cake. The frosting leaned awkwardly to one side. The lettering wasn't straight. The words, "Congratulations, my love," looked like they had been written by a child. Emily laughed the moment she saw it. "You actually baked this?" Daniel scratched the back of his neck. "I watched 4 different videos." She laughed even harder before wrapping her arms around him. "It's the most beautiful cake I've ever received," and she meant every word. That night, they sat on the kitchen floor eating cake directly from the pan because they had forgotten to buy plates for the celebration. For a moment, it felt exactly like the early years of their marriage. Simple, peaceful, real. Neither of them realized those moments were becoming increasingly rare. While Emily's career continued climbing, Daniel kept fighting battles no one could see. He updated his resume countless times, completed online certifications, applied for positions he wasn't qualified for, and positions he was overqualified for. He accepted temporary contracts, seasonal jobs, construction work, warehouse shifts, delivery routes, landscaping, anything honest, anything that allowed him to keep contributing. But every opportunity ended the same way. The project ended, the company downsized, someone else had more experience. "We'll keep your resume on file." Those words became painfully familiar. Daniel never stopped trying, but each rejection quietly stole another piece of his confidence. He never complained, never blamed God, never blamed Emily. Instead, he blamed himself. One evening, he arrived home carrying a worn leather notebook. "I've been writing down some business ideas," he said with a hopeful smile. Emily immediately closed her laptop. "I want to hear them." For nearly an hour, Daniel spoke with excitement. A home maintenance company, a small delivery service, a mobile repair business. Some ideas were practical, others still needed work. When he finally finished, he looked at her like a child waiting for approval. "What do you think?" Emily smiled warmly. "I think you're incredibly creative." His face brightened. "Really? Really?" He waited another second. "Which one do you think has the best chance?" Emily hesitated, not because she wanted to hurt him, but because she had spent the entire day listening to executives discuss million-dollar investments and market forecasts. His dreams suddenly felt small. "I don't know," she answered softly. "Maybe you should keep looking for something more stable." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, I probably should." He smiled. But something inside him quietly collapsed. It wasn't her answer that hurt. It was the hesitation before it. A few weeks later, Emily attended a 3-day leadership conference hosted by the company. The event took place at a luxury hotel overlooking the ocean. Everything felt different. Elegant dinners, motivational speakers, business owners from across the country, people who talked about success as though failure had never introduced itself. Daniel loved receiving the photos she sent. The conference room, the beach, the sunset, the smiling team. Every picture made him proud. Every picture also reminded him how different their worlds were becoming. One evening, she called him from the hotel balcony. "I wish you could see this view." "I'm happy you're there," Daniel replied honestly. "I miss you. I miss you too." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then another call appeared on Emily's screen. "I'm so sorry," she said. "They're waiting for me downstairs." "It's okay. I'll call you tomorrow. I'll be here." She truly intended to call. She simply never found the time. Back home, Daniel waited until almost midnight before finally turning off the living room lamp. He told himself she was busy, And she was. When Emily returned home, she brought him a beautiful leather journal. "I saw this and immediately thought of your business ideas." Daniel smiled. "I love it." What he didn't know was that Ryan Collins had helped her choose it. Ryan wasn't trying to steal another man's wife. He simply admired Emily, her discipline, her intelligence, her calm under pressure. He often told her things no one else at work bothered to say. "You have natural leadership. People trust you. You make difficult decisions look easy." To Ryan, those were ordinary compliments. To Emily, they became something she hadn't realized she was missing. Recognition, not as someone's wife, not as someone's employee, but as a woman whose voice mattered. Nothing inappropriate had happened. No secrets. No flirting. No hidden meetings. Only conversations, professional respect, and admiration. Sometimes, that's exactly where emotional betrayal begins. Daniel noticed small changes. Emily answered work emails during dinner. Business calls interrupted movie nights. Weekend plans were canceled because another meeting had appeared. None of those moments seemed important on their own. Together, they slowly built a wall neither of them could see. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Daniel looked up from the kitchen table. "What if we drove to the lake after church tomorrow?" Emily smiled immediately. "I'd love that." At that exact moment, her phone rang. She looked at the screen. The smile faded. What happened? They moved Monday's executive meeting to tomorrow afternoon. Daniel stared through the rain-covered window. "Of course they did." Emily heard the disappointment in his voice. "I'm sorry. I know you are." She walked over and hugged him. He hugged her back, but for the first time in their marriage, the embrace didn't feel like two people finding comfort in each other. It felt like two people desperately trying to hold together something that was quietly slipping away. Neither of them understood it yet. The greatest threat to their marriage wasn't another person. It was the slow erosion of the life they had built together. One postponed conversation at a time, one canceled promise at a time, one silent disappointment at a time. The line. She never thought she would cross. Emily had never imagined that betrayal could begin without a single touch. If someone had asked her years earlier whether she could ever hurt Daniel, she would have laughed. Never. There wasn't another man in her heart. There wasn't another marriage she dreamed about. There wasn't another life she wanted, or at least that was what she kept telling herself. By now, nearly 10 years had passed since they had exchanged their vows. Their children, a boy and a girl, filled the house with laughter. Homework, toys scattered across the living room floor, and bedtime prayers every evening. From the outside, they looked like the family everyone wished they had. Inside, invisible. Cracks were quietly spreading. Emily's career continued to rise. She had become one of the youngest executives in the company's history. People admired her discipline, her intelligence, her ability to solve problems without raising her voice. Daniel admired those same qualities more than anyone. Whenever someone congratulated Emily, he smiled as though they were talking about his own success. "She deserves every bit of it," he would proudly say. No one ever heard jealousy in his voice, only love. But every promotion Emily received reminded Daniel of another opportunity that had slipped through his fingers. Another interview, another temporary contract, another company that thanked him for his effort before letting him go. He never complained. Instead, he worked even harder. One Saturday afternoon, Emily arrived home earlier than expected. She found Daniel in the garage, covered in grease, repairing an old lawnmower. "What happened to you?" she asked with a smile. Daniel laughed. "If I can get this thing running again, Mr. Thompson said he'll pay me $100. Emily looked at the rusty machine. It was nearly falling apart. "So you're fixing broken lawnmowers now?" "I'm fixing whatever someone is willing to pay me to fix." He smiled. She smiled back, but something inside her quietly broke. Years earlier, she would have seen determination. Now all she could see was survival. That realization terrified her, not because Daniel had changed, but because she had. Monday morning brought another board meeting. Emily presented a strategy that would save the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. When she finished, the room remained silent. Ryan Collins leaned forward. I've worked with executives for over 20 years. I can teach people how to read numbers. I can teach leadership, but I can't teach what you naturally have. Emily looked down, embarrassed. I was just doing my job. Ryan smiled. No, you were doing what people twice your age still haven't learned to do. The meeting ended. As everyone walked out, Ryan caught up with her in the hallway. Can I give you one piece of advice? She nodded. Never let anyone convince you to make yourself smaller just because they feel comfortable with the version of you they already know. Emily frowned slightly. What do you mean? I mean, some people spend their entire lives waiting for permission to become who they were created to be. He smiled politely before walking away. He had no idea what those words would do to her. The sentence echoed in her mind for the rest of the day. That evening, Daniel was waiting at home. The kids ran to the door shouting excitedly, Dad made spaghetti. Emily laughed. You cooked? Daniel grinned. Well, I followed a recipe. It survived. Dinner was loud, messy, full of laughter. Their daughter accidentally spilled juice. Their son couldn't stop talking about school. For a brief moment, everything felt normal again. After the children had gone to bed, Daniel carried 2 mugs of coffee onto the back porch. They sat together watching the stars. When was the last time we did this? He asked. Emily smiled softly. I don't remember. I miss you. Those 3 words landed heavier than she expected. She reached for his hand. I'm right here. Daniel looked at her. Gently. No, your body is. But sometimes it feels like your heart is still at work. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to tell him he was wrong. She wanted to promise everything would get better. Instead, she stayed silent. The silence answered more honestly than words ever could. Over the next few weeks, Ryan and Emily worked closely on a major project. Most conversations were about deadlines, budgets, clients. Nothing inappropriate, yet every conversation left Emily feeling strangely energized. She couldn't explain why. Ryan challenged her ideas, respected her opinions, asked questions. Daniel had stopped asking years earlier, not because he didn't care, but because life had exhausted him. For the first time in years, Emily felt intellectually understood. That frightened her. One rainy evening, after everyone had left the office, she remained alone reviewing reports. Ryan walked past her office. You're still here? So are you. He laughed. Fair enough. He noticed the family picture on her desk. You have a beautiful family. Emily smiled. I do. You must be proud. I am. Ryan nodded. Then don't forget them while you're busy building everyone else's future. He walked away without another word. Emily stared at the photograph. Daniel, their son, their daughter, herself. She suddenly realized she had spent nearly 12 hours thinking about work and less than 5 minutes thinking about home. For the first time, she was afraid, not of Ryan, not of temptation, but of the woman she was slowly becoming. That night, long after Daniel had fallen asleep beside her, Emily quietly slipped out of bed. She knelt. In the dark living room, tears streamed down her face. Lord, I don't know what's happening to me. I still love my husband. So why do I feel myself drifting away? There was no answer, only silence. When she finally returned to bed, Daniel instinctively reached for her hand in his. Sleep. He had done that almost every night. Since they were newly married, Emily held his hand tightly and cried even harder because for the first time, another man's words had followed her home. She hadn't betrayed Daniel physically, not yet, but somewhere deep inside her heart, a door had quietly been left unlocked. Chapter 5. The silence between right and wrong. Emily tried to convince herself that nothing had changed. She still loved Daniel. She still kissed him goodbye every morning. She still prayed with their children before bed. She still wore her wedding ring with pride. From the outside, nothing was different, but inside, everything was. She stopped looking forward to weekends, not because she disliked being home, but because Monday meant she would return to the office, return to conversations that challenged her, Returned to a version of herself that felt confident, important, alive. That realization filled her with shame. One Friday evening, Daniel arrived home carrying a small paper bag. "I have a surprise." Emily smiled. "What is it?" He carefully pulled out 2 movie tickets. "The old theater downtown is showing the movie we wanted to watch." She smiled warmly. "You remembered. I bought them 2 weeks ago." She checked her phone. Her smile slowly disappeared. "I completely forgot." "Forgot what?" "The executive team scheduled a dinner with investors tonight." Daniel looked at the tickets. "You already said yes?" "I had to. You didn't tell me. I thought I had." A long silence settled between them. Finally, Daniel forced a smile. "It's okay. You should go." Emily walked toward him. "I can cancel." He shook his head. "No. You've worked too hard for this opportunity." "But," he gently kissed her forehead, "I'll take the kids for pizza instead." Emily watched him leave the kitchen carrying the tickets in his hand. He never complained. That somehow hurt even more. The dinner lasted much longer than expected. Executives laughed, investors celebrated, new contracts were signed, champagne glasses were raised. Emily smiled when everyone else smiled. But her mind kept returning to the movie tickets folded inside Daniel's jacket pocket. As the evening ended, Ryan noticed she had become unusually quiet. "You disappeared." She smiled weakly. "I was thinking." "About work?" She hesitated. "No. My husband." Ryan nodded. "He must miss you." "He does. And I miss him." Ryan looked at her thoughtfully. "Then why does it sound like you're talking about someone who's already gone?" Emily couldn't answer because she wasn't sure herself. The weeks that followed became increasingly complicated. Daniel continued doing everything he could to support the family. He woke up before sunrise, accepted every temporary contract, learned new skills online, fixed neighbors' appliances, painted fences, cleaned gutters, delivered furniture on weekends. He never stopped trying. One afternoon, Emily unexpectedly left work early. She found Daniel sitting alone in the backyard. A stack of job applications rested beside him. He stared silently at a rejection email on his phone. She sat beside him. "Another one?" He nodded. "They said I interviewed well, but they hired someone with more experience." Emily gently placed her hand over his. "I'm sorry," Daniel smiled. "It's not your fault." "No, but I wish life were easier for you." He looked at the sky for a long moment. "You know what scares me?" "What?" "I'm starting to wonder if this is all I'll ever be." Emily immediately turned toward him. "Don't say that. I'm serious. I keep thinking, what if I'm the reason you're carrying this family alone?" Her heart shattered. She wrapped both arms around him. "You've never been my burden." He hugged her tightly. For a few precious seconds, everything felt safe again. She silently prayed that the feeling would last. It didn't. At work, Ryan noticed Emily struggling. "You've been distracted." "I have a lot on my mind." "You don't have to carry everything by yourself." Those words echoed inside her. Because Daniel had always tried to protect her from his pain, Ryan was inviting her to share hers. There was a difference. One evening, they stayed late finishing an important proposal. The office was almost empty. Rain tapped softly against the glass walls. Ryan ordered pizza for the remaining staff. Everyone else eventually went home. Only Ryan and Emily stayed behind, reviewing final reports. The conversation slowly drifted away from budgets and deadlines. "What did you want to become when you were 20? Ryan asked. Emily laughed. "I wanted to be a teacher." "What happened?" "Life." "And you?" "I wanted a family more than anything." Ryan smiled. "And?" "I have one," she answered quickly, but her voice carried uncertainty she hadn't intended to reveal. Ryan didn't press further. Instead, he quietly said, "I hope you never lose yourself trying to keep everyone else happy." Those words stayed with her all the way home. Daniel was asleep on the couch when she walked in. An unfinished woodworking project rested on the coffee table. Pieces of sanded oak, a small hammer, wood glue. She looked closer. It was a picture frame. Inside lay a handwritten note. For our 15th anniversary, he had been making it by hand. Emily slowly picked it up. On the back, he had carved 4 simple words, "Still choosing you." Her knees suddenly felt weak. She sat on the floor, holding the unfinished frame against her chest. Tears streamed silently down her face. How had she allowed herself to drift so far from the man who still chose her every single day? She walked into the bedroom, knelt beside the bed, and prayed harder than she had prayed in years. Lord, I don't know how to fix what's happening inside me. I still love my husband. I still love my family. So why does my heart feel divided? No answer came, only the sound of rain outside the window. Emily wiped away her tears, returned to the living room, covered Daniel with a blanket, gently kissed his forehead, and whispered the words he never heard. "I'm so sorry." She still hadn't crossed the physical line, but the battle inside her heart had become impossible to ignore. And deep down, she feared she was losing a fight no one else even knew she was fighting. Chapter 7. The night truth broke them. There are moments that separate a life into 2 chapters: everything you believed before and everything you are forced to believe after. For Daniel, that moment arrived on an ordinary Thursday night. The children had finally fallen asleep. Their son had left his backpack in the hallway. Their daughter had forgotten her favorite stuffed rabbit on the living room couch. The dishwasher hummed quietly in the kitchen. Outside, a soft rain tapped against the windows. Everything looked painfully normal. Emily stood at the kitchen sink, staring into the darkness outside. She had rehearsed this conversation hundreds of times. Every version ended differently. Every version hurt. Daniel noticed she hadn't touched her tea. "You've been quiet all evening." Emily nodded without looking at him. "I know." He smiled gently. "Tough week?" She slowly turned toward him. "Can we sit down?" The way she asked, something inside Daniel immediately tightened. He followed her into the living room. Neither of them spoke. The silence seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. Finally, Emily took a deep breath. "There are things happening inside me that I don't know how to explain." Daniel leaned forward. "What kind of things?" She looked down at her wedding ring. "I've been trying to fight them. I've prayed, I've cried, I've begged God to take them away." Daniel felt his heartbeat quicken. "Emily." She finally looked into his eyes. "I think I've betrayed you." The room became completely still. Daniel didn't move, didn't interrupt, didn't even breathe. Emily continued, "I haven't had an affair. I haven't slept with anyone. I've never kissed another man. But," she broke down crying, "my heart hasn't belonged completely to you for a long time." Daniel lowered his eyes. He whispered only one question. "Who?" Emily answered through tears. "Ryan." The name echoed through the room like thunder. Daniel had never met him, yet suddenly, he hated how familiar that name already sounded. Emily kept speaking. "It didn't happen all at once. I didn't wake up wanting someone else. It started with conversations, work, feeling understood. I kept telling myself it wasn't wrong. Then one day, I realized I was sharing pieces of my heart with someone who wasn't my husband." She covered her face. "I should have stopped. I wanted to stop. I didn't know how." Daniel remained silent, not because he had nothing to say, because every sentence inside him seemed to collapse before reaching his lips. He stood up slowly, walked to the window. Rain blurred the streetlights outside. Emily watched his reflection in the glass. She had never seen him look so small. Minutes passed. Finally, he spoke. "Did you love him?" Emily answered immediately. "No." "Then why?" Her tears came harder. "I don't know." "No," she corrected herself. "I do know. I stopped believing in us." Daniel slowly turned around. "What do you mean?" "I watched you fight every day. I watched you work until your hands bled. I watched you get rejected again, and again, and again." Her voice trembled. "And somewhere inside me, I stopped believing life would ever change. Daniel closed his eyes. So this was about money? No, it was never about money. It was about hope. I lost mine. Those words hurt more than anything else she had said. Because Daniel realized she hadn't stopped loving him, she had stopped believing in him. He sat back down. His hands trembled. For the first time in years, Emily noticed how tired he looked. Not physically, spiritually. He stared at the floor for a long time, then quietly asked, "Did everyone know except me?" Emily immediately shook her head. No, no one. It was all inside me. I hid it from everyone. I was ashamed. Daniel nodded slowly. Another long silence followed. Finally, he asked the question he had been avoiding. "Does he know how you feel?" Emily hesitated, then answered honestly. "I think he realized something had changed, but nothing ever happened. I never wanted that." Daniel gave a faint, almost invisible nod. He believed her. Strangely, that made everything even harder. Because if she had lied, if she had become someone cruel, it would have been easier to hate her. Instead, she was sitting in front of him completely broken. The woman he had loved for 15 years, the mother of his children. The person who had once whispered, "I married the man, not the job." Neither of them noticed the clock reaching midnight. Emily whispered, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I just couldn't keep lying to you." Daniel looked at her for a long time. Then something happened that Emily never expected. He moved closer, took both of her shaking hands into his own, and began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere too deep for words. Emily cried with him. Neither tried to comfort the other. There were no words capable of repairing what had just broken. After several minutes, Daniel finally spoke. His voice was barely audible. "I forgive you." Emily looked up in disbelief. "What?" "I forgive you." Fresh tears rolled down her face. "You shouldn't." "Maybe not, but I do." She shook her head repeatedly. "How can you forgive me after this?" Daniel answered with the honesty of a man whose heart had just been shattered. "Because if I don't, this pain will destroy both of us." Emily collapsed into tears. She had expected anger, accusations, perhaps even divorce. She had prepared herself for everything except grace. Daniel held her while she cried, but something inside him had quietly changed. Forgiveness had entered his heart. Trust had not. Later that night, they lay in the same bed, only inches apart, yet they had never felt farther away. Daniel stared at the ceiling until sunrise. One question repeated itself over and over inside his mind. Not, why did she love someone else? But, when did she stop believing I was enough? And somewhere in the darkness, a marriage survived, but it would never be the same again. Chapter 6. The Confession That Changed Everything. There are moments in life that divide our stories into two parts, everything before and everything after. Emily didn't know the exact day she stopped feeling at peace. She only knew that every morning she woke up promising herself the same thing. "Today, I'll fix this." And every night, she went to bed carrying even more guilt than the day before. The project Ryan had invited her to lead became the largest opportunity of her career. It required constant meetings, business trips, conference calls late into the evening. More decisions, more pressure, more time together. Sometimes they spent 10 or 12 hours solving problems side by side. They challenged each other's ideas, finished each other's sentences, celebrated every milestone as a team. It felt effortless. That frightened Emily, not because Ryan had done anything inappropriate, but because she had begun looking forward to conversations that should never have become emotionally necessary. Every time she caught herself smiling after one of his compliments, she immediately felt ashamed. Every time she laughed a little longer than she should have, she thought about Daniel, She prayed constantly, "Lord, remove this from my heart." Yet the battle only seemed to grow stronger. Meanwhile, Daniel kept trying to build a future that always seemed just beyond his reach. He accepted a maintenance position at a manufacturing company for the first time in almost a year. He allowed himself to hope. He arrived early every morning, stayed late whenever extra work was available, learned every machine in the building. His supervisor noticed, "You've got a good attitude." Daniel smiled. "I just want a chance." For 6 weeks, everything seemed different. He came home smiling. The children noticed. Emily noticed. Even the house felt lighter. One Friday evening, he walked through the front door carrying a pizza. "I have news." Emily smiled. "What happened?" "My supervisor told me they're thinking about making my position permanent." Their son jumped off the couch. "Does that mean we're celebrating?" Daniel laughed. "It means we're thanking God." That night they prayed together as a family. For the first time in months, Emily cried during the prayer. Not because she wasn't grateful, because she wondered if she still deserved the family sitting around that table. Monday morning, the company announced unexpected layoffs by lunchtime. Daniel's position no longer existed. He came home carrying a cardboard box. Inside were his work gloves, his coffee mug, and the employee badge he had worn with so much pride. Emily opened the front door. One look at his face, and she already knew. He tried to smile. "I guess it wasn't meant to be." She hugged him tightly. He didn't cry. He simply stood there, completely still, as though another piece of him had quietly disappeared. That night, Emily locked herself in the bathroom. She slid down against the wall, covered her face with both hands, and whispered through tears, "How much more can one person lose?" A week later, Ryan noticed she seemed distracted. "You've been carrying something for weeks." Emily forced a smile. "I'm fine." "No, you're surviving." "That's different." She looked away. He continued quietly, "You spend your life taking care of everyone else. Who takes care of you?" Emily felt something inside her break. No one had asked her that question in years. Not because Daniel didn't care, but because Daniel was drowning too. She answered before thinking, "I don't know anymore." Ryan didn't move closer. He didn't touch her. He simply listened. Sometimes, listening can become the most dangerous form of intimacy. That evening, Emily arrived home long after everyone was asleep. The kitchen light was still on. Daniel sat alone at the table. A notebook lay open in front of him, pages filled with calculations, business ideas, monthly expenses, job applications, rejected interviews, crossed out plans. He looked exhausted. I waited up. Emily felt her throat tighten. "You should have gone to bed. I wanted to see you." She sat across from him. Neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel looked at her. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Are you still happy?" The question stole the air from her lungs. "What do you mean?" "I don't mean your job. I mean, us." Emily stared at the table. He continued, "I feel like I've been losing you. A little at a time. I just don't know where you've been going." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm here." Daniel smiled sadly. "I know your body is, but your heart." He couldn't finish the sentence. Emily reached for his hand. He held hers immediately, exactly as he always had, without hesitation, without conditions, without suspicion. That unconditional love hurt more than any accusation could have. The following weekend, the company held its annual leadership gala. Emily almost stayed home. Daniel insisted she go. "You earned this. I'll stay with the kids." She kissed him before leaving. For reasons she couldn't explain, she held the kiss a little longer than usual, almost as though she feared it might be the last time. It still felt innocent. The gala ended late. Most guests left. Ryan stepped outside onto the hotel terrace overlooking the city lights. Emily followed a few minutes later, hoping only to breathe. Neither expected the other to be there. They stood quietly beside the railing. The city stretched endlessly beneath them. Ryan finally spoke. "Can I ask you something?" Emily nodded. "Are you happy?" The question echoed exactly like Daniel's. But this time, she couldn't hide behind a polite answer. Tears filled her eyes. "I don't know." Ryan remained silent. She continued speaking. "I love my husband. I truly do. But somewhere along the way, I stopped believing life would ever get better for him." She immediately covered her mouth. She hadn't meant to say it aloud. Ryan looked at her with compassion, not triumph, not excitement, compassion. "You must feel very alone." Emily closed her eyes. "I do." They stood there in silence. No kiss, no embrace. No promises. Nothing happened that the world would call an affair, yet everything had already changed, because when Emily drove home that night, she realized she had just shared with another man the fears she had never shared with her own husband. That was the moment she understood. She had already betrayed the safest place her heart had ever known. For the next 3 days, she barely slept. Every conversation with Daniel felt heavier. Every smile from her children made her feel more ashamed. She could no longer carry the secret. One Thursday evening, after the children had gone to bed, she asked Daniel to sit with her. He looked at her face, immediately sensing something was wrong. His heart began to race. Emily's hands trembled so violently that she could barely hold her coffee cup. She looked into the eyes of the man who had loved her through every season of life, then whispered the words she feared more than anything. "Daniel, I need to tell you something." And in that moment, neither of them knew that the next few minutes would change the rest of their lives forever. Chapter 8. When forgiveness wasn't enough. Forgiveness is often described as the end of pain. For Daniel, it was only the beginning. The morning after Emily's confession, the house felt strangely peaceful, not because everything had been resolved, but because the secret was finally gone. For the first time in months, there were no more lies between them, only wounds. Daniel still woke up before sunrise. He still made coffee for both of them, still packed the children's lunches, still kissed Emily goodbye before she left for work. Nothing about his love had changed. Everything about his heart had. Emily noticed it immediately. Daniel smiled just as often, but his eyes no longer rested the same way when they met hers. Trust had disappeared quietly, leaving behind a silence neither of them knew how to fill. They decided to fight for their marriage, not because it was easy, because they believed it was worth fighting for. Every Tuesday evening, they met with an older couple from church who had been married for more than 40 years. They prayed together, read scripture, talked honestly. Sometimes they left those meetings hopeful. Other times, they drove home without saying a single word. Healing wasn't happening in a straight line. Some days, Daniel laughed with the children as though nothing had happened. Other days, one simple notification on Emily's phone was enough to make his stomach tighten. He hated that feeling, not because he doubted Emily, because he no longer recognized himself. One afternoon, while Emily was taking a shower, her phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. Daniel looked at the screen. Ryan Collins. His heart immediately began racing. He stared at the phone. He could have opened the message. No one would ever know. His hand moved toward it, then stopped, slowly. He stepped back. When Emily came into the kitchen, she saw the phone exactly where she had left it. "You didn't check it?" Daniel smiled sadly. "I wanted to. I really wanted to. But if I have to become someone I don't respect just to keep my marriage, I've already lost." Emily burst into tears. She immediately opened the message. It contained only 3 words. Meeting moved forward. Nothing else. She deleted the conversation in front of Daniel, then blocked Ryan's personal number. "I don't want anything in my life that makes you question your peace," Daniel nodded. I know, and I believe you. He truly did. Yet belief was no longer enough to silence fear. Months passed. Ryan was transferred to another regional office. Emily never saw him again. She expected that to solve everything. It didn't, because the real battle had never been Ryan. It had been what had changed inside her. She worked hard to rebuild what she had broken. She came home earlier whenever possible, stopped answering emails during dinner, planned family weekends again, laughed with the children, held Daniel's hand during church. To everyone around them, it looked like the marriage had survived. Only they knew how much effort it took just to look normal. Meanwhile, Daniel refused to stop trying professionally. He enrolled in a certification program for industrial maintenance. Every evening he studied after the children went to bed. Emily often found him asleep over his books. She quietly covered him with a blanket before turning off the lights. The first exam came. He failed by 2 points. It's okay, Emily encouraged. You'll pass next time. He smiled. I will. He took the test again. This time, he passed. For the first time in years, he felt hope. A friend from church connected him with an interview at a manufacturing company. The interview went exceptionally well. The manager even shook his hand. We'll call you tomorrow. Daniel drove home smiling. Emily hadn't seen that smile in years. The next afternoon, the phone rang. His smile disappeared before the conversation even ended. The company had frozen all hiring. The position no longer existed. Daniel quietly placed the phone on the table. Emily watched him. He didn't cry, didn't complain, didn't even seem angry. He simply walked into the garage, closed the door, and sat there alone for nearly 3 hours. That frightened Emily more than tears ever could, because silence had become his way of surviving. The disappointments kept coming. A delivery company hired him. 3 months later, it closed. A friend offered him a partnership in a small business. The investor backed out. He started repairing appliances from home. The demand disappeared after a few weeks. Every time Daniel stood back up, life knocked him down again. One evening, Emily found him sitting in the backyard after everyone had gone to bed. The old leather notebook rested on his lap, the same notebook filled with dreams, business ideas, plans, sketches. Most of the pages were now crossed out. He stared at them without moving. Emily sat beside him. You've been out here a long time. Daniel nodded. Do you know what hurts the most? She quietly shook her head. I don't mind working hard. I've never been afraid of hard work. What scares me, he paused, is starting to believe that no matter how hard I try, I'll never become the man this family needs. Emily immediately grabbed his hand. You already are. He smiled gently. No, I used to believe that. But lately, it feels like I'm asking all of you to carry the weight that should have been mine. Emily couldn't hold back her tears. She wrapped her arms around him. He hugged her back, but for the first time, she realized something terrifying. Daniel wasn't losing hope because she had betrayed him. He was losing hope because life itself had convinced him he would never be enough. And deep inside, a question she hated began growing louder every day. Not, can we save this marriage? But, can Daniel ever become the man he dreams of being? She hated herself for thinking it. She prayed against it. She fought it. Yet the question refused to disappear. Neither of them understood it yet, but that question would soon become the one that changed the course of their entire lives. The day she stopped waiting. No one wakes up one morning and decides to walk away from 15 years of marriage, at least not when love once ran as deep as theirs. The decision had been forming quietly, one disappointment at a time, one postponed dream at a time, one sleepless night at a time. Emily hated herself for even thinking about leaving. Every time the thought crossed her mind, she immediately prayed, Lord, please take this away from me. She didn't want another life. She didn't want another family. She didn't even want another man. She simply wanted to stop carrying the constant fear that tomorrow would look exactly like yesterday. Daniel noticed the change, not because she treated him differently, because she had become unusually gentle, almost too gentle. She hugged him longer, asked how his day had been more often, watched him when he wasn't looking. It felt like she was trying to memorize him. One evening, while folding laundry together, Daniel smiled. "I think things are finally getting better." Emily looked up. "What makes you say that? We're talking again. We're praying together. The kids are happy. I don't know. I feel like God is doing something." Emily forced a smile. "I hope you're right." She wanted to believe those words. She truly did, but another part of her had already stopped believing. A month later, Emily received another promotion, Vice President of Operations, the largest salary increase of her career. The board applauded, her team celebrated. Ryan was no longer with the company, but another executive had recently joined the leadership team. His name was Matthew Lawson. He was confident without being arrogant, successful without showing off. A widower, a father, quiet, respectful. Unlike everyone else, Matthew never flirted with Emily. He simply treated her like an equal. Over the following months, they worked together on several major projects. He admired her judgment, trusted her decisions, often asked, "What do you think?" Emily noticed something unsettling. She had begun comparing the men around her to Daniel, not because she wanted to, because comparison had quietly become a habit. She hated herself for it. Every time she caught herself thinking, Daniel would never know how to handle this. She immediately felt guilty, yet the thoughts kept returning. Daniel never stopped trying. He completed another certification, started a small home repair business, printed business cards himself, knocked on doors, advertised online. Some weeks were encouraging, others. Not a single customer called. One afternoon, he returned home carrying his toolbox. Emily immediately noticed the defeated look on his face. "No jobs today?" He smiled weakly. "Not today." She walked over and hugged him. He whispered, "Maybe tomorrow." Those two words had become the soundtrack of his life. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next month, maybe next year. Always hope, never arrival. The children began noticing the tension. Their son asked one evening, "Mom, why don't you and Dad laugh as much anymore?" Emily froze. Daniel answered first. "We're just tired, buddy." The boy nodded. But children often understand much more than adults realize. That night, Emily cried in the shower so no one would hear her. A few weeks later, Matthew invited the executive team to dinner after a successful project launch. Emily almost declined, then accepted. The evening was relaxed. People laughed, talked about life, families, dreams. At one point, Matthew looked across the table and said quietly, "You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. When was the last time someone took care of you?" Emily didn't answer, because she already knew. Daniel had always tried. He simply hadn't had the strength anymore. That realization broke her heart. When she arrived home, Daniel was asleep on the couch. An open notebook rested beside him. Inside were pages filled with numbers, budgets, monthly expenses, ideas for expanding his little repair business. At the bottom of one page, she noticed a sentence written in his own handwriting. "Don't give up. They still believe in you." Emily closed the notebook and cried, not because Daniel had failed, because he never stopped believing he eventually would succeed. She wished she still shared that faith. 3 days later, she asked Daniel if they could talk after the children went to bed. He smiled. Of course. They sat together at the kitchen table, the same table where they had celebrated promotions, birthday cakes, school projects, Christmas dinners. Emily couldn't lift her eyes. Daniel reached across the table. "What's wrong?" She finally looked at him. Tears were already falling. "I don't think I can do this anymore." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "I've tried. I've prayed. I've fought against these thoughts for years. but something inside me has changed. Daniel's breathing became slower. He already knew what she was about to say. I can't keep living like this, he whispered. Are you saying you want a divorce? Emily covered her face. I never wanted this. But yes. Silence filled the room. Daniel didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse her. He simply stared at the woman he still loved more than anyone else. Finally, he asked the question that would stay with him for years. Is there someone else? Emily closed her eyes. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, very quietly, yes. Daniel's heart seemed to stop. It isn't just because of him. I know. It started long before. I know. I've already lost you, haven't I? Emily couldn't answer. Because he was right. She had left emotionally long before she found the courage to leave physically. Daniel slowly stood, walked to the window. The rain had started again. Without turning around, he whispered words Emily would remember for the rest of her life. I spent 15 years asking God to open doors for me. I never imagined the one that would close would be the door to my own home. And in that moment, neither of them realized. The darkest chapter of Daniel's life was only beginning. The darkest winter. The house had never been so quiet. For 15 years, Daniel had always known where Emily was. Sometimes she was in the kitchen humming while making breakfast. Sometimes she was helping the children with homework. Sometimes she was simply sitting beside him on the porch after a long day. Now, there was only silence. The closet looked wrong. Half of it was empty. Her favorite mug was gone. The bathroom counter held only his toothbrush. Even the air inside the house felt different. The children spent part of the week with him and part with Emily. Every time they packed their little backpacks, Daniel forced himself to smile. Have fun with Mom. I'll see you in a few days. He waited until the front door closed before allowing the tears to come. He never wanted his children to carry the weight of his heartbreak, so he carried it alone. The first weeks passed in a blur. Daniel barely remembered eating. He stopped answering phone calls. Friends from church left messages. Co-workers from old jobs checked on him. His brother drove across town twice just to see him. Daniel thanked everyone, then closed the door. He wasn't angry. He was empty. For the first time in his life, he stopped praying. Not because he no longer believed in God, because he no longer knew what to say. Every prayer seemed to begin with the same question. Why? And every prayer ended in silence. He kept searching for work because the bills didn't stop arriving. Neither did life. He attended interviews wearing the same navy blue suit he had owned for years. Each interview ended almost the same way. We'll let you know. Nobody ever did. One employer finally hired him. A warehouse on the edge of the city. Daniel thanked God. Maybe. Finally, a door had opened. 3 weeks later, the company filed for bankruptcy. Everyone was dismissed. Daniel walked back to his car carrying another cardboard box. Inside were his lunch container, a coffee mug, and another forgotten dream. He placed the box in the trunk, closed it, then sat behind the steering wheel. He didn't start the engine. He simply stared through the windshield. Cars passed. People hurried home. The world continued moving. His life didn't. Days turned into months. His savings disappeared. The repair business never gained enough customers. The certification he had worked so hard to earn brought no opportunities. Every attempt ended exactly where the previous one had: failure. At night, sleep became impossible. He replayed every conversation with Emily, every promotion, every canceled date, every late-night meeting, every moment he had ignored because he trusted her completely. But the question that haunted him wasn't about Matthew or Ryan or any other man. It was much deeper. When did she stop believing in me? He asked himself that question hundreds of times, sometimes while driving, sometimes while lying awake until sunrise, sometimes while washing dishes, Sometimes, while sitting alone in church after everyone else had gone home, he never found an answer. One rainy afternoon, Daniel opened the old leather notebook where he had spent years writing business ideas. Every page reminded him of another dream that had never happened. Home repair company, landscaping business, furniture restoration, mobile maintenance service. Every plan ended with the same handwritten word: canceled. He slowly closed the notebook, then whispered something he had never dared to say before. Maybe everyone would be better off without me. The words frightened him, not because he wanted to disappear, because for the first time, he wondered if anyone truly needed him anymore. He immediately stood up, walked outside, sat on the back steps. The cold rain soaked his clothes. He didn't move. He simply sat there until a passing neighbor quietly approached. "Daniel?" He looked up. It was Mr. Henderson, an elderly widower who had lived across the street for years. "I've been watching your porch light stay on every night." Daniel forced a smile. "I guess I haven't been sleeping much?" The old man sat beside him without asking permission. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Mr. Henderson said something Daniel would never forget. "The most dangerous lies are the ones pain whispers when nobody else is listening." Daniel lowered his head. Tears filled his eyes. "I don't know how to keep doing this." "I know. I've been there." The old man gently placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "And that's exactly why you shouldn't stay there alone." Those words broke something inside him. For the first time since the separation, Daniel cried openly in front of another person. Not because he had given up, because he was finally honest enough to admit he couldn't carry the weight by himself. The following Sunday, after months away, Daniel walked back into church. People smiled when they saw him. No one asked uncomfortable questions. No one judged him. The pastor simply embraced him. "We've missed you." Daniel couldn't answer. His throat closed. After the service, he remained seated while everyone else slowly left. The sanctuary became almost empty. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows. Daniel bowed his head. His prayer was only one sentence: "God, I don't know how to live anymore." There was no dramatic miracle, no voice from heaven, no instant peace, only a quiet realization. He was still breathing, and perhaps that was enough for today. Sometimes healing doesn't begin with answers. Sometimes it begins with surviving one more day. Daniel stood up, slowly, wiped his eyes, and walked toward the church doors. He still had no job, no restored marriage, no clear future. But for the first time in months, he had taken one small step forward. He didn't know it yet, but that single step would become the foundation of everything God was about to build. One small step. Real change rarely begins with a miracle. More often, it begins with one small decision. The morning after returning to church, Daniel woke up before sunrise for the first time in months. He made his bed. It seemed insignificant. No one else would ever notice, but to a man who had spent weeks struggling just to get out of bed, it felt like climbing a mountain. He opened the curtains. Sunlight filled the room, the same room that had once echoed with laughter. The same room where he and Emily had dreamed about. Growing old together, the memories still hurt, but they no longer stopped him from moving. He walked into the kitchen, made himself breakfast, not because he was hungry, because he knew he had to start taking care of himself again. That afternoon, he called Mr. Henderson. "I've been thinking about what you said." The old man smiled through the phone. "And? I think I need help." "No, son. You've already taken the hardest step. You admitted it." Over the next few weeks, Daniel slowly rebuilt a routine. Every morning, he read a chapter from the Bible, went for a walk around the neighborhood, applied for jobs, studied for an hour, worked on his repair business in the afternoon. Some days he repaired a lawnmower, other days it was a broken washing machine. Occasionally, no, customers came at all. Still, he opened the garage every morning because discipline was replacing despair. The children noticed the difference first. One Saturday morning, his son looked around the garage. "Dad, it looks different in here." Daniel smiled. "I cleaned it." His daughter pointed toward a wooden sign hanging above the workbench. It read, "One job at a time, one day at a time." "Did you make that?" "I did." "Why?" Daniel looked at both children. "So I don't forget." "What?" "That big things are built from small ones." His son nodded thoughtfully. "I like that." Daniel smiled. "So do I." Business remained slow. Bills continued arriving. Some nights he still wondered if he would ever catch up. But something inside him had changed. He no longer measured every day by money. He measured it by progress. Had he learned something new? Had he treated someone with kindness? Had he kept his word? If the answer was yes, the day hadn't been wasted. One afternoon, a customer named Mrs. Alvarez called. Her refrigerator had stopped working. Daniel repaired it in less than an hour. When she asked how much she owed, he quoted a price far lower than expected. She looked surprised. "That's all?" "It's a fair price." She smiled warmly. "I know 3 people who need someone honest." Before the week ended, all 3 had called. The next week, 2 more. Daniel realized something. People weren't recommending him because he was the cheapest. They trusted him. For years, he had searched for the perfect opportunity. Now, he was slowly building one. Meanwhile, Emily watched from a distance whenever the children returned home from Daniel's house. They told stories. Dad fixed Mrs. Alvarez's refrigerator. Dad built me a bookshelf. Dad made pancakes all by himself. She smiled every time they spoke quietly. She thanked God that the children still saw joy in their father, but she also noticed something unexpected. Daniel never spoke badly about her, not once. Not to the children, not to mutual friends, not even during church gatherings. If anyone asked how Emily was doing, his answer never changed. "I hope she's doing well." Nothing more, nothing less. His kindness made her guilt even heavier. Months passed. The little repair business continued growing. Daniel bought a second-hand work van with faded white paint and nearly 200,000 miles on it. It wasn't impressive, but it was his. He carefully painted the company name on both doors. Daniel's Home Repair, no fancy logo, no marketing agency, just his own steady handwriting. As he stepped back to admire it, Mr. Henderson walked across the driveway. "You know what I see?" Daniel laughed. "A very old van?" The old man smiled. "No, I see a man who stopped waiting for someone else to rescue him." Daniel looked at the van again. For years, he had prayed for God to open doors. Maybe God had been handing him tools instead. That evening, Daniel parked the van in front of his house. The children ran outside cheering as if he had bought a brand new luxury truck. His daughter hugged him tightly. "I'm proud of you, Dad." Those 5 words struck him harder than any paycheck ever could. He knelt in front of both children. "I want you to remember something." "What?" "Success isn't about becoming richer than everyone else. It's about becoming the kind of person people can trust." His son smiled. "I think you're already doing that." Daniel couldn't speak. He simply hugged them both. For the first time in years, the future no longer felt impossible. It still looked uncertain, still difficult, still far away, but it finally looked possible. And sometimes hope doesn't return all at once. Sometimes it arrives disguised as one customer. One repaired refrigerator, one old van, one little girl's words, one faithful step at a time. The man she thought would never change. A year passed, then another. Life moved quietly, not dramatically, not perfectly, steadily. Daniel never became an overnight success. He became something far more valuable, consistent. Every morning, his old white service van left the driveway before sunrise. Every evening it returned covered in dust, paint, sawdust, and honest work. His calendar slowly filled. One customer became 5, 5 became 20. 2020 became more referrals than he could handle alone. People trusted him, not because he advertised, because he always arrived when he said he would, charged fair prices, finished what he started, and treated every home as though it belonged to family. One afternoon, Mrs. Alvarez called again. This time, "I don't need a repair." Daniel laughed. "That's good news. I need someone I can recommend to my son. He's opening 3 coffee shops. He asked if I knew an honest contractor." Daniel accepted the meeting. He expected a small renovation. Instead, the project lasted 4 months. When it ended, the owner hired him again, then recommended him to 2 other business owners. For the first time in his life, Daniel wasn't looking for work. Work was looking for him. He hired his first employee, then a second. Both were men who had struggled to find steady jobs. Daniel recognized something familiar in their eyes, the quiet fear of not being enough. On the first morning they worked together, one of them apologized. "I'm still learning." Daniel smiled. "So am I." The man laughed. "I thought you already knew everything." Daniel shook his head. "No, I've just learned not to quit." Those words became the company's unofficial motto. "We don't quit." Daniel printed them on the wall of the workshop. The employees repeated them whenever a difficult project appeared. Slowly, the business developed a reputation that money couldn't buy. Integrity, reliability, respect. His relationship with the children grew stronger than ever. Every Wednesday evening became dad night. Sometimes they cooked together. Sometimes they worked in the shop. Sometimes they simply sat on the porch eating ice cream and talking about life. His daughter once asked, "Dad, are you still sad?" Daniel looked toward the sunset before answering, "Sometimes." "Do you miss Mom?" He smiled softly. "I'll probably always care about your mom, but missing someone and wishing things had happened differently are not the same as wanting to go backward." His daughter quietly nodded. She didn't fully understand, but one day she would. Meanwhile, Emily's career continued to flourish. She now occupied one of the highest leadership positions in the company. She earned more money than she had ever imagined. She traveled, spoke at conferences, managed hundreds of employees. Everything she had worked for, she had achieved. Yet every evening, she returned to a house that felt strangely empty. Matthew had been kind, supportive, successful. He had never mistreated her, but something never felt complete. One evening, he noticed her staring silently through the dining room window. "What are you thinking about?" Emily smiled politely. "Nothing." He gently shook his head. "No, you're somewhere else." She wanted to deny it. Instead, she whispered, "I was just remembering." Matthew didn't ask another question. Some memories don't need explanations. One Saturday afternoon, their son had a school science fair. Both parents attended. Daniel arrived wearing simple work clothes. His boots still carried traces of sawdust. Emily arrived directly from a business conference. Elegant, professional, confident. For the first time since the divorce, they stood only a few feet apart. Daniel smiled warmly. "Hi, Emily." "Hi, Daniel." No anger, no bitterness. Just 2 people whose lives had taken different paths. Their son proudly demonstrated his project, a model bridge built from wood. "My dad helped me design it." Daniel smiled. "No, you built it. I just held a few boards." The teacher approached. "You must be Daniel. I've heard wonderful things about your company." Emily looked surprised. The teacher continued, "My husband hired your team during the church renovation. He said you've become one of the most trusted contractors in the county." Daniel smiled awkwardly. "We've been blessed, nothing more." He never mentioned the waiting list, the growing business, the new warehouse he had recently rented, the contracts he had signed. Emily noticed something she hadn't expected: confidence. Not loud confidence, quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need recognition. For years, she had prayed that Daniel would become this man, standing only a few feet away. She realized he finally had, and she hadn't been there to see it happen. That evening, After the science fair ended, Emily sat alone in her car for nearly 20 minutes. She didn't start the engine. She simply watched Daniel loading wooden display boards into the back of his work truck while laughing with the children. He looked peaceful, not richer, not more important. Peaceful. For years, she had believed success would finally change him. Now she understood something that hurt more than she expected. Success hadn't changed Daniel. Suffering had. And somewhere deep inside, a question quietly appeared. Not, did I make the wrong decision? But, what if I left just before the season I'd been praying for finally arrived? She drove away without saying another word. But for the first time since the divorce, the certainty she had carried for years began to disappear. The harvest she never saw. People often say success changes people. In Daniel's case, success simply revealed the man he had been trying to become all along. 3 years after the divorce, Daniel's home repair had grown far beyond what he had ever imagined. The old white van was still parked behind the workshop. He refused to sell it. His employees often joked about it. "You know you can afford a new one now, right?" Daniel would simply smile. "That van reminds me who I was, and who I never want to forget." The business now employed 12 people. Several of them had once struggled with unemployment. One had recently left prison. Another had been living in his car before Daniel hired him. People often asked why he gave so many second chances. His answer never changed. "Because someone believed I still had value when I couldn't see it myself." He never mentioned names, but deep inside, he was thinking about Emily. Not because he still lived in the past, because she had once believed in him before she stopped believing. And he refused to erase that part of their story. Every Friday morning, Daniel gathered the entire team before work. They stood together inside the workshop with coffee in their hands. No long speeches, no motivational slogans, only one simple question. What kind of people are we becoming? Sometimes no one answered. Other times, someone quietly said, "People others can trust." Daniel would smile. "Then let's prove it today." That culture spread faster than any advertisement. Customers noticed. Employees stayed. The company continued growing, not because it was the cheapest, because people knew that when Daniel gave his word, he kept it. One afternoon, Daniel received an invitation to speak at a local business conference. His first instinct was to decline. "I'm not a speaker," he told the organizer. The woman on the phone laughed softly. "That's exactly why we want you. You built something real." During the event, dozens of entrepreneurs filled the auditorium. Daniel walked onto the stage wearing the same quiet humility he carried everywhere else. He looked at the audience, then smiled. "I don't have a secret formula. I've failed more times than I've succeeded." A few people laughed. He continued, "I spent years praying for God to change my circumstances. I didn't realize He was changing me first." The room became silent. When success finally came, I was no longer the same man who had once begged for it. Many people applauded, some stood, not because Daniel spoke like a professional, because every word sounded lived. That same week, Emily attended a leadership summit in another city. Hundreds of executives filled the convention center. One of the keynote speakers mentioned Daniel's company as an example of ethical leadership and sustainable growth. Emily looked up. Surely, it couldn't be the same Daniel. Then his photograph appeared on the giant screen behind the stage. She stopped breathing. The speaker smiled. Daniel Parker built one of the fastest-growing service companies in the region. But what impressed us wasn't his revenue. It was his employee retention, customer loyalty, and reputation for integrity. Emily stared at the screen. The applause around her faded into silence. She wasn't hearing the audience anymore. She was hearing Daniel's voice from years ago. Maybe tomorrow, she remembered every rejection, every interview, every failed business idea. Every night, he came home exhausted but still smiled. Tears filled her eyes. She quietly stood and walked out of the auditorium. That evening, she drove to the old neighborhood almost without thinking. The little apartment building where they had started their life together was still there, smaller than she remembered. She parked across the street. The tiny balcony, the narrow kitchen window, the cracked sidewalk where Daniel had once proposed that they save money by planting tomatoes in buckets because they couldn't afford a garden. She laughed through her tears. Back then, she had thought they were poor. Now, she realized they had once been incredibly rich. Rich in hope, rich in partnership, rich in shared dreams. Somewhere along the way, she had mistaken financial success for security, and she had forgotten that peace and prosperity are not always the same thing. Later that weekend, their daughter invited both parents to a charity event organized by her school. Daniel arrived early, as always. He spent nearly an hour helping volunteers carry tables and food supplies before the event even started. No one had asked him to. He simply noticed the work that needed to be done. Emily watched from a distance. Several people greeted Daniel by name: parents, teachers, business owners, employees. A young man approached him. "Mr. Parker, I just wanted to thank you." Daniel looked confused. "For what?" "You hired my father when nobody else would. He says working for you saved our family." Daniel smiled gently. "I'm glad he gave us a chance." The young man shook his head. "No, you gave him one." Emily felt something tighten inside her chest. She suddenly realized something she had never understood before. Daniel had not become successful because money finally found him. Money had simply followed the man he had become. For years, she believed she was waiting for Daniel to change. She never imagined the greatest change would happen only after she walked away. That night, Emily sat alone on her back porch long after midnight. The house was silent. Matthew had already gone to bed. She stared into the darkness, not thinking about the company, not thinking about promotions, not even thinking about money. Only one thought remained. I left because I believed he would never become the man I hoped for. She closed her eyes. A tear rolled slowly down her cheek. And somehow, he became that man. Without me. For the first time in years, Emily didn't ask God to bless her career. She whispered a very different prayer. Lord, if I've mistaken success for wisdom, please teach me what I failed to see. She had no idea where that prayer would lead, but deep inside, the walls she had spent years building around her heart had finally begun to crack. The door she never expected to knock on. Regret has a strange way of arriving. Sometimes, it doesn't come when we make the wrong decision. It comes years later, when we finally understand what that decision truly cost. Emily tried to ignore the thoughts. She buried herself in work, accepted new projects, extended business trips, stayed busy from sunrise until late at night. But every quiet moment brought Daniel back into her mind. Not the successful businessman everyone admired, the young man who had once walked 3 miles home because they couldn't afford gas. The husband who had spent 3 hours baking a crooked chocolate cake just to celebrate her promotion. The father who never missed a school play, even when he had worked 12 hours that day. She had spent years remembering everything Daniel had failed to become. Now, she couldn't stop remembering everything he had always been. One Sunday afternoon, their daughter called. "Dad is having a family barbecue next Saturday. You should come." Emily hesitated. "I don't know if that's a good idea." It was Dad's idea. Emily fell silent. "He invited me. He said you're always part of this family because you're my mom." Emily closed her eyes. That single sentence hurt more than any accusation ever could. The following Saturday, she almost turned the car around twice. By the time she reached Daniel's house, several cars were already parked outside. Employees, neighbors, friends from church, children running across the backyard. Laughter, music, the smell of grilled food. It felt alive. Daniel noticed her almost immediately. He walked toward her with the same calm smile she remembered. "Hi, Emily. Hi. You came." "I almost didn't. I'm glad you did." There was no awkwardness, no bitterness, no hidden sarcasm, only kindness. The kind of kindness that can only grow inside a healed heart. Throughout the afternoon, Emily watched Daniel interact with everyone around him. He remembered every employee's child's name. He introduced people who had never met. He carried chairs for elderly guests before anyone asked. When one of the teenagers accidentally dropped an entire tray of drinks onto the patio, Daniel laughed. "It's only juice. We'll clean it together." No anger, no embarrassment, just patience. Emily quietly smiled. He had always been like that. She simply hadn't noticed anymore. Later that afternoon, Mr. Henderson arrived. Daniel immediately walked over and embraced the older man. The two laughed together for several minutes. Emily eventually found herself standing beside them. Daniel smiled. "Emily, I don't think you've ever properly met Mr. Henderson." The elderly man shook her hand warmly. "I've heard wonderful things about you." Emily looked surprised. "You have?" Mr. Henderson nodded. "Daniel talks about you with great respect." She looked at Daniel. "You do?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "You're the mother of my children. That alone deserves respect." Emily felt tears forming again. There had been countless opportunities for Daniel to resent her, to humiliate her, to make subtle remarks. He never chose any of them. As the evening came to an end, most guests had already left. The children were helping clean the backyard. Emily found Daniel stacking folding chairs. "Need some help?" He smiled. "I'll never say no to free labor." She laughed. It was the first genuine laugh they had shared in years. For a while, they worked in silence. Finally, Emily spoke. "I heard you spoke at that business conference." Daniel shrugged. "It was terrifying. People loved it. I still don't know why." "I do." He looked at her. "You finally believe in yourself." Daniel lowered his eyes. "No, I finally stopped measuring my worth by things that could disappear." Those words stayed with Emily. She remembered the years she had spent measuring success by promotions, titles, income, recognition. Daniel had learned to measure it differently, by integrity, faithfulness, peace. Before leaving, Emily stopped beside her car. "Daniel," he looked up, "I need to ask you something." "Okay. Have you ever hated me?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He thought carefully. "There were days I didn't understand you. There were days I cried because of you. There were days I asked God questions I never thought I'd ask." He smiled gently. "But hate?" He slowly shook his head. "No. Hate would have kept me chained to the worst day of my life. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life living there." Emily wiped away a tear. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself." Daniel looked at her with compassion. "Then don't make the mistake of refusing yourself the same grace you've asked God to give you." Emily stared at him. For years, she had imagined this conversation. She thought she would find anger. Instead, she found freedom. Not freedom from consequences, freedom from bitterness. As she drove home that night, she realized something she had never understood before. Daniel hadn't become extraordinary because he had built a successful company. He had become extraordinary because suffering had never stolen his ability to love. And for the first time since the divorce, Emily wondered, not whether Daniel could ever forgive her, but whether she would ever learn to forgive herself. Far behind her, Daniel stood quietly on the porch, watching her car disappear down the road. Then he whispered a simple prayer. "Thank you, Lord, not for changing my circumstances, but for changing my heart." He smiled, turned off the porch light, closed the front door, and walked back into the life he had rebuilt, one faithful day at a time. Epilogue. Before you give up, before you leave, Take one last moment to think about this story. Maybe at some point you saw yourself in Daniel, or maybe you saw yourself in Emily. The truth is, most lives are not changed by one single decision. They are changed by the small choices we make every day, the moments when we stop believing, the moments when we stop waiting, the moments when we give up on someone before their story is finished. Never judge a person's future by their hardest season. Winter has convinced many people that spring would never come, and yet spring always arrives. Sometimes the greatest mistake we can make isn't loving the wrong person, it's giving up on the right person too soon. Because time has a way of revealing what impatience can never see. Remember this: not every broken relationship can be restored. Not every goodbye will become another hello. But forgiveness will always set someone free, and the first person it sets free is you. So before you walk away from someone, before you decide that nothing will ever change, ask yourself one question: what if this is only one chapter and not the end of the story? Because the page you're ready to close today may be the very page where God was about to begin your greatest miracle.